Today we're going to talk about the enemies encountered in Netflix's One Piece, Season 2 on the road to Alabasta. Starting from Loguetown and moving through Whisky Peak, Little Garden, and Drum Island, we'll break down the threats the Straw Hats face and how Netflix should handle these enemies in live action. But before we start, let me say something briefly. The channel is going through a tough period because of the algorithm. So, if you like the video, subscribe and leave a comment. It genuinely helps a lot. Let's begin. Our first stop, Loguetown. The first and most important confrontation is Luffy's encounter with Smoker, and this is the moment where One Piece's tone truly begins to shift. Netflix should not treat this like a simple first boss fight. This clash isn't a classic punch-for-punch brawl, it's a hunter and prey chase. As the Marine captain of Loguetown, Smoker targets Luffy the moment he sets foot in the city, and that sense of pursuit needs to be constantly felt in the live-action streets. Through camera language, Smoker should be framed as a threat who could emerge from any corner at any moment, sending a clear message to the audience: you're entering the Grand Line, but the system isn't letting you go. What makes Smoker dangerous isn't just his authority, but the fact that he's a Logia user thanks to the Moku Moku no Mi. At this point in the story, Luffy's power is almost completely ineffective against a body that can turn into smoke. What Netflix must emphasize here is Luffy's first real moment of physical helplessness. Punches pass through smoke, attacks fail, and the audience realizes something crucial. In the Grand Line, not every enemy is beatable. This is a major threshold for live-action viewers because it clearly shows that the power balance has fundamentally changed. The true breaking point of this encounter is Smoker's Nanoshaku Jitta. Thanks to the Sea Stone tip, Smoker can suppress Devil Fruit powers and suddenly become someone who can genuinely capture Luffy. Netflix should never present this weapon as an ordinary baton. The moment of contact, Luffy's strength instantly draining, his breathing faltering, the flash of panic must be felt clearly. This scene tells the audience that the Marines aren't dangerous just because of numbers, but because of technology and knowledge. Smoker here isn't a villain, he's the harsh face of the system. The most important part of this confrontation is that it doesn't end with a victory. When Smoker corners Luffy, the situation is resolved not through strength, but through fate's intervention. Dragon stepping in and creating an escape route for Luffy is a moment Netflix needs to treat with a heavy, almost mystical tone. Smoker witnessing power on this scale for the first time also changes him as a character. From this point forward, Luffy stops being just another criminal to Smoker. He becomes a personal obsession. Ending Loguetown with Smoker should feel strategically powerful for Netflix. Luffy survives not by winning, but by escaping. Smoker abandons his post and heads into the Grand Line. This tells the audience one thing very clearly: the enemies won't stop chasing you anymore. If Netflix ends this sequence with smoke rising behind Smoker, heavy footsteps, and a determined stare, it sets up a perfect threat line for the rest of the season. Smoker is the first true shadow stretching all the way to Alabasta. Our second stop, Whisky Peak. What happens on this island is where Netflix needs to hit the theme of nothing is as it seems for the first time and hit it hard. When the Straw Hats arrive, the pirates' cheers, the food, the drinks, and the festival atmosphere all seem innocent at first glance. Netflix should intentionally exaggerate the sense of comfort here, using music, crowds, and a warm color palette to relax the audience just like the crew. Because this comfort is the foundation for the betrayal that explodes later that night. Whisky Peak is the Grand Line's first real lesson in deception. The truth reveals itself with the emergence of Baroque Works, the arrival of Mr. Priest. Five and Miss Valentine makes it clear that this town isn't just a stop, it's an organized assassination hub. Mr. Five's Bomu Bomu no Mi, which turns his body into a living weapon, and Miss Valentine's Kilo Kilo no Mi, which allows her to manipulate her weight to extreme levels, present both a visual and tonal challenge for Netflix. If these powers are played too cartoonish, the threat disappears. If the right amount of absurdity is preserved, the result stays true to One Piece's spirit: dangerous, but fun. What truly makes Whisky Peak unforgettable isn't just the enemies, but the chaos itself. Luffy attacking Zoro because he thinks Zoro destroyed the town is a perfect moment for Netflix to elevate character conflict. This isn't just a funny misunderstanding, it's about trust and leadership. Netflix shouldn't turn this into a pure gag. Instead, it should show how destructive two powerful characters can be in a moment of lost control. This clash is what allows Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine's use the chaos plan to work. Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine's biggest mistake in battle is underestimating the Straw Hats' raw power and speed. Despite explosions, crushing weight attacks, and bizarre tactics, they fall behind Luffy and Zoro's instincts and reflexes. Netflix can intentionally keep the fight choreography messy and chaotic here, because the soul of this scene isn't a calculated duel, it's an uncontrolled collision. The audience should feel that everything is spiraling at once. Whisky Peak marks the true beginning of the Baroque Works threat. Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine may be defeated, but the presence of a much larger organization lingers behind them. Vivi's true identity being revealed and Crocodile's name entering the conversation for the first time elevate this conflict from a side adventure into the prologue of a major war. Netflix shouldn't end this arc lightly. The audience needs to feel that the Straw Hats are now being pulled into the fate of an entire country. Whisky Peak is the moment where innocent fun gives way to organized evil. Our third stop, Little Garden. What happens here carries a completely different tone from the previous arcs, and Netflix should build the enemy threat, not around raw power, but around time, pressure, and psychological danger. The Island of Giants initially feels exotic and adventurous, but Baroque Works' trap through Mr. 3 turns it into a survival story. Mr. 3's Doru no Mi isn't explosive or instantly lethal, it's slow, inevitable, and suffocating. Netflix must clearly communicate this distinction, because the tension in Little Garden isn't "you're dying now," but you're moving toward an unavoidable end. At the center of Mr. 3's trap is the wax execution, turning Zoro, Nami, Vivi, and Brogy into living statues. In live action, this needs a dark and disturbing aesthetic. The wax slowly creeping over their bodies, restricting movement, making it harder to breathe. The audience should physically feel the helplessness. Netflix should deliberately slow the pacing here, because Mr. 3's true weapon is control over time. As a calm, unemotional antagonist who doesn't shout or laugh, Mr. 3 should feel like an executioner quietly preparing death. Zoro seriously considering cutting off his own leg is a moment Netflix must never downplay. This scene clearly shows Zoro's threshold for sacrifice and what he's willing to give up for his goal. In live action, if this moment is handled with close-ups and silence, the audience can feel what's going through Zoro's mind. This isn't just a fight, it's the question of whether you'd sacrifice your own body to survive. Mr. 3's power works precisely because of this psychological pressure. With Luffy and Usopp's intervention, the scene explodes into chaotic rescue. Mr. 3's Candle Champion form needs careful balance in live action. Too comedic, and the threat vanishes. Too serious, and One Piece's absurdity is lost. The strength of this conflict comes from Luffy's raw force colliding with Mr. 3's calculated intelligence. Miss Golden Week's colors trap ability, manipulating Luffy emotionally, shows that the enemies aren't just physical threats, but psychological ones, and Netflix should clearly emphasize this. The finale of Little Garden is one of One Piece's purest improvised victory moments. Realizing that wax can melt, combining rope, oil, and fire, and turning the trap against its creator perfectly represents Luffy's instinct-driven fighting style. Netflix should cut this sequence fast, but clearly. The audience needs to see that the solution comes not from intellect, but from experience and instinct. Mr. 3's defeat proves that Baroque Works isn't just powerful, it's dangerously creative. Little Garden is the dark threshold where the Straw Hats learn they must escape traps, not just win fights. Our fourth and final stop, Drum Island. The conflict with Wapol stands apart from previous enemies and is where Netflix needs to clearly show the source of evil. Smoker represented systemic pressure. Baroque Works was organized crime. Mr. 3 was a death trap built on intellect. Wapol is pure tyranny and abuse of power. Netflix must not reduce him to a harmless cartoon villain. Yes, Wapol is absurd, but his real threat is that he deliberately destroyed an entire country. Drum Island's cold, hunger, and lack of doctors are direct results of his rule. Wapol's Baku Baku no Mi is both entertaining and risky for live action. His ability to eat anything and fuse it into his body is visually striking, but Netflix should emphasize how ugly this power is. Wapol's attacks shouldn't look elegant, they should feel grotesque. His misshapen body reflects his character and creates discomfort. This is the opposite of a charismatic villain like Crocodile, and that contrast is intentional. Wapol is dangerous not because he's strong, but because he wields authority cruelly. At the center of Luffy's fight with Wapol is pure anger. Nami being targeted and Chopper's trauma show that Luffy isn't fighting for adventure this time, but against injustice. Netflix needs to clearly shift Luffy's tone here from playful captain to firm, decisive leader. Wapol's royal drum crown attack creates visual chaos while also exposing his arrogance and incompetence. The collapse of the threat must come hand in hand with the collapse of the villain himself. Wapol's defeat isn't just a victory in battle, it's the end of an era for Drum Island. Netflix should frame this moment not as a personal win, but as a country finally breathing again. The silence after the castle falls, the lifting of oppression, and Chopper's liberation are the true outcomes of this fight. The illusion of the untouchable king shattering with a single punch powerfully reflects one of One Piece's core messages. Titles don't matter, actions do. Ending Drum Island with Wapol clarifies the tone of the road to Alabasta. From this point on, enemies aren't just strong, they're systematic, political, and destructive. Netflix must make the audience feel that the Straw Hats are no longer simple adventurers. Smoker's Pursuit, Baroque Works' Shadow, Mr. Three's Traps, and Wapol's Tyranny all combine to make Crocodile's threat in Alabasta feel inevitable. Drum Island is the emotional threshold of this journey, and if Netflix handles it right, the audience will feel that there's no turning back once Alabasta begins. The enemies encountered on the road to Alabasta don't just make the Straw Hats stronger, they teach them how cruel and unjust the world can be. If Netflix reflects this transition properly, the weight of Season 2 will feel far heavier. Now it's your turn. Which enemy impacted you the most on this journey, and where do you think Netflix absolutely cannot afford to make a mistake? Make sure to share your thoughts in the comments so we can dive deeper into the arcs you're most curious about in future videos. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Your support truly means a lot to this channel. See you in the next video.